the first thing for a lot of audience is, what is a vegan diet in the first place? Okay. Vegan diet means eating a diet, eating food that does not involve any animal products. Okay. So that means no meat of any kind, of any type of animal, no eggs, no dairy products either. So that may be a little bit interesting, a little bit difficult for Indian people to conceive of, because we're such a dairy-heavy society in India. But it also means no dairy. If somebody's leading a fully vegan lifestyle, then they will exclude animal products from other aspects of their life too. So they would use products that are free from any type of leather, silk, wool, or anything that uses an animal. That would be a vegan lifestyle. And they may be also choosing cosmetic products or bathing products that don't have any animal ingredients and were not tested on animals either. So that would be a vegan lifestyle. But when it comes to the diet, it excludes animal products from the food. A plant-based diet is often used synonymously or interchangeably with vegan diet. And it generally means that you're eating mainly plant-based foods. For some people, yes, they'll be vegan. They'll be 100% plant-based. But for some people, they may not be 100% plant-based. They may be, let's say, 80, 90, 95% plant-based. But there may be some animal foods still in their diet. And it's predominantly plant-based, however. So it's almost there, but not quite vegan, but it's still predominantly plant-based. Okay, so that would be a plant-based diet. And we talk about these things together in many cases, because a lot of the research that is done, some of it does involve studying people who are purely vegan, but in many cases it involves studying people who are mostly plant-based, right? And we're looking at the advantages of that versus people who are eating a more animal food-based diet. And that's what the research is done on such populations. So when we talk about a vegan or plant-based diet, people do it for different reasons. One reason may be ethical reasons. Some people do not want to harm animals, and therefore they want to exclude meat, eggs, and including dairy. They want to exclude dairy from their diets as well, okay? Because dairy, a lot of people don't know it, but there's also a lot of harm to animals in the production of dairy. So they want to do it for ethical reasons. People want to do it for environmental reasons because it has a much lower environmental footprint. But people also may want to do it for health reasons. Now, to get the maximum healthy impact from a vegan diet or a plant-based diet, what we want to do is optimize that diet, okay? Because you can eat a broad spectrum of things, and some of those things are not good for you. People can eat Coca-Cola and fried foods, and those kind of things. That may be vegan. Or they may want to eat fresh fruits and vegetables and lentils and beans, all these kind of amazing healthy foods, whole grains. And that would be an example of a whole food plant-based diet. So when you eat foods in their whole form and not their highly processed form, that's a whole food plant-based diet. So whole foods means fruits and vegetables that are not overcooked. You may cook them, but not overcook them. You'll eat whole grains, so you'll have brown rice instead of white rice. You'll have whole grain flour or bread rather than white bread. You will have, instead of Maggi noodles and white spaghetti, you'll have maybe pasta or noodles that are made out of whole grains and things like that. So whole foods, instead of having fruit juice, you would have whole fruits and things like that. So you're trying to eat foods closer to their original form and not the highly processed form. You can avoid, fried foods and these sweets, because you're refining the food highly to make sugar out of it and then put in sweets. You're refining food a lot to get oil, and then you're frying stuff. You may take all the fiber out of food when you have white flour or white rice or those kind of things. So we have whole grains. We have the pulses, okay? So beans and lentils, things like that. Fruits and vegetables in their whole form as much as possible, and not overcooking your vegetables. You may cook them. It's good to eat some raw, but eat some cooked, but not overcook them. And nuts and seeds, those kind of things as well, in their whole form. So I just actually reviewed some of them. We talked about whole grains, so all the grain foods, okay? Or anaj, we say in Gujarati, but there may be a similar word in Hindi or other Indian languages. So the whole grains, and that includes whole brown rice. That includes whole wheat. That includes things like nachni or millet, jowar, things like that. All of these ancient grains are included in the grain family. Then there's the pulses family, or the beans and lentils family. So that includes rajma, which is kidney beans, chickpeas, and also includes all the different dals, so all the different lentils, mung beans. It also includes soya. Soya is also a bean. It's in the bean family. It's fantastic for you. So like I said, we want to eat them in the whole form. If we're having things like tofu and soy milk, by the way, that is not a highly processed food. That is minimally processed, because you're not taking too many things out of it to make it into tofu or soy milk. So it's still minimally processed and close to a whole food. Then there is your fruits, which we don't want to make into fruit juice. If you take orange and then you make it into orange juice, you're processing it too much, because you're taking away all the fiber from the foods, and the fiber and the other things that go with it are very, very important with it for you as a healthy food. And if you're concentrating the juice, you're making it into a lot of sugar. You're having a high amount of sugar. You're concentrating maybe 5 oranges into a glass of orange juice. But rather than that, it's better you eat maybe 1 or 2 oranges rather than the orange juice, which is high in sugar. So fruits, vegetables, which you can juice because they're not so high in sugar. But when we eat vegetables in India, we often overcook them. So we want to make sure we do not overcook our vegetables. You should still see the bright colors of the vegetables after you cook them, and also eat some raw vegetables. So fruits, vegetables, grains, pulses. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is nuts and seeds. So eating nuts and seeds is fantastic for you. You don't want to eat them in a very sugary form or a fried form or anything like that, or overly salted. But eating nuts is great. And you can also make nuts into butter. So you can have things like peanuts, which is actually a legume, but peanuts or almonds, and you can make them into almond butter or peanut butter. That's still a minimally processed form, because you're not adding too much or taking things out of it. So those things are really good for you, except if you eat peanut butter where there's a lot of added sugar. You should not eat peanut butter and added sugar. So those are the main food groups we talked about. Whole grains, pulses, beans, lentils, that's the second group. Fruits, vegetables, nuts and seeds. And the one thing that I can add in, a couple of things I can add in spices. Spices aren't exactly a food group, but a lot of the Indian spices are very healthy for you. So it's good to put some of them in, but not overdoing it and not adding too much salt. Okay, some spices are good. Things like turmeric and whatnot are good for you, but don't make things overly spicy in terms of the hotness and salt, especially. And do not add sugar to a lot of your foods. You got to reduce sugar. So the spices are kind of an additional thing we can add on top of the food groups. And then we can also talk about healthy fats. Healthy fats are things like maybe soybean oil, groundnut oil, canola oil, flaxseed oil, grapeseed oil. The plant-based oils are generally good, but avoiding things like coconut oil and palm oil, which are high in saturated fats. So a small amount of oil is okay, but not too much. So we talk about whole food and low fat, plant-based. So eating plant foods, the food groups I mentioned, in a whole food form or close to a whole food form, and with a low fat, with a low amount of fat. And that's the healthiest way you can optimize a vegan diet. So there are numerous health benefits of a vegan diet. Now, sometimes people don't know about them, and sometimes people over-exaggerate them. But it's good to know what the actual scientific literature shows regarding the health benefits of a plant-based and especially of a vegan diet. One of the main benefits, and that's going to be a great benefit all around the world, is regarding diabetes. Because things like diabetes, diabetes itself, and related diseases like obesity and high cholesterol and high blood pressure that go along with diabetes and metabolic syndrome are very, very prevalent worldwide, especially prevalent in the Indian population. We know that people on a vegan diet, a healthy whole food vegan diet, low fat, can probably cut their risk of diabetes to about half. So you have less than, you get about half the number of people who might develop diabetes. And if you do develop diabetes, you'll have a milder form. In fact, however, many people who do have diabetes could significantly reduce and reverse their diabetes. A lot of people on a whole food, plant-based, vegan diet that's low in fat can actually get off of their insulin if they're, eating an excellent diet. Or if they're on multiple medications or their diabetes is hard to control, it brings it really well into control. if somebody has mild or moderate diabetes and they go onto a whole food, low fat, plant-based diet that's really optimized, in some cases they may reverse their diabetes altogether and get off their medications in some cases too. So it's an excellent diet choice for people with diabetes to prevent it and as well as to treat it. It also can help you reverse obesity and reduce obesity if you're having a proper vegan diet, like I mentioned, and reduce your cholesterol and also reduce your blood pressure, things that go along with diabetes and metabolic syndrome. Heart disease is the most common cause of death in many countries of the world, certainly in the West and probably in India too, if I recall the last statistics that I saw. It's the #1 cause of death. It goes along with things like diabetes, high blood pressure, cholesterol. People ultimately develop atherosclerosis in their blood vessels. And when that happens in the heart, people may get heart attacks as time goes on. In fact, in our communities, we see a lot of people who have heart attacks at the age of 40, 50, and a lot of people die very prematurely at those young ages of heart disease. Heart disease is caused by cholesterol and saturated fats, and some other factors too, but those are two of the main causes, in addition to some other things as well. Of course, smoking, lack of exercise, and those kind of things too. But saturated fat, high fat intake, being obese, and having high cholesterol, eating cholesterol foods, and is going to be one of the main causes of heart disease. So on a low fat, whole food, plant-based diet, if people are very strict, in some cases, people may actually reverse their heart disease. There's data showing this. But for the general, good vegan diet, even if it's not completely strict in the lowest fat form, it's going to be preventive of heart disease. And people have lesser rates of heart disease as compared to people who are eating a lot of animal-based foods. This is shown over and over again in a lot of different kinds of research. So it's good to know. A caveat to this is that some people promote online that it is okay to eat cholesterol and saturated fat. And in fact, they say that there's research showing that there's no effect. The problem is the research that they are quoting was funded by the meat, dairy, and egg industries. They paid for this research. And if you look at the design and the parameters of the studies actually are designed to not be able to find the difference between being plant-based and not being plant-based. They're sort of purposely designed to show a non-difference. And there's some big flaws in the study with respect to that. But however, well-designed studies show over and over again that you can reduce heart disease. Doesn't mean you can be immune from heart disease completely, but you can certainly reduce your heart disease. And if you're really strict, for some people, they can actually reverse some of their heart disease as well. So vegan diet is not a cure-all for everything. I don't want to give that impression. Okay, you can still get some of these problems that I mentioned, but you basically reduce them. Now, certain type of cancers are also reduced by a plant-based diet. Some of the examples are colon cancer. In fact, within the last couple of years, the WHO has classified red and processed meat as type 1B and type 1A carcinogens with regards to colon cancer. And that's a big move by them. There's a lot of data about this, but there's data about other cancers as well. So colon cancer, breast cancer, prostate cancer, and some other cancers that are less common, like maybe some pancreatic cancer and whatnot. There are research showing that you can reduce these things by a healthy plant-based diet. As I mentioned, the quality of the diet matters. And this is great because these are some of our biggest cancer killers. And we would love to reduce them. It doesn't cost you anything extra, and it just makes you healthier overall, but at the same time gives you good prevention of those cancers. We could reduce prostate cancer, by the way, by about, by up to 30% if we are on a good vegan diet. There's some literature showing this. And one other thing about cancer is that people consuming more soy throughout their lives, so Asian people in China and whatnot, who've consumed a fair bit of soy, like maybe 2 or 3 servings of soy on most days, throughout their life, they are shown to have lesser amounts of breast cancer and prostate cancer in their later age, reduce rates by about, let's say, 30, 40, 50%, depending on the study, is shown. So that's really fantastic in terms of soy consumption. People are often worried about soy, but it's shown to be beneficial. And some people say that there's estrogen in soy and that they should not consume it if they have breast cancer, because it's going to promote the breast cancer cells. Estrogen would promote the breast cancer cells. But actually it's shown that people, women who consume soy after a diagnosis of breast cancer tend to have less recurrence at, the 4 or 5 year mark. Now, it doesn't mean that they won't get a recurrence, or some people do get recurrences, but the percentages are improved in those people who consume soy, those women who consume soy. So there's an advantage there. Western countries, and I grew up in the West, and looking back, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, most people didn't know what the word vegan even meant. And if people said they were vegetarian, they would say, where do you get your protein from? Because these people in those countries are mostly eating a lot of meat, and they didn't know about getting protein from anywhere else. Now, if you go to Canada, USA, most people do know that you can get a lot of protein from plant-based sources. And in fact, almost, most restaurants that you go to, they have, vegan options. And there are probably 30 or more vegan restaurants just in Toronto alone. And that's a big change from how it was before. So the question is, how do you get protein? Protein, we know, is a very important nutrient. We need to get about 0.8 grams per kilogram of body mass per day of protein. So if you weigh 50 kilograms, then 50 times 0.8, you need 40 grams of protein per day. If you weigh 70, then you're going to need more. You're going to think 70 times 0.8, and you're going to get you're going to calculate how much protein you need per day, like roughly 60 grams per day for somebody like that. So that's how much you need. Now, where do you get it from? So the kings of the protein in the plant world are pulses. So I tell people to eat, pulses or soy, 2 to 3 times a day in their diet, and eat a lot of it. Don't just have some little bit of dal that's really watered down, but have a lot of lentils, have a lot of dal, have rajma, a big plate of rajma, or chickpeas, have a big plate of chickpeas, have a big bowl of mung, whether you sprout it or it's steamed, and then you do the sauteed with the Indian spices, the tadka or bagar, what we call it, have the mung beans. There are a lot of lentils that we have in South Indian food. So if you eat idli, for example, it's steamed, whereas dosa does contain a lot more oil, but idli is a steamed food and it contains a lot of dal as well. Peanuts, peanut butter, not the sugary kind, but the pure peanut butter, which is harder to find in India, but pure peanut butter. All of these things are lentils and legumes, and we should be eating lots of them in all the different forms. One special bean that is the highest of all in protein are the soya beans and soya foods, so tofu, soya milk, and soya beans. Fantastic, fantastic protein. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that, because I think you're going to ask me a question about soy, but that's one of the kings of the protein family. And then there is also whole grains. So when you eat whole things made out of whole wheat, the whole grain wheat, not white flour. White flour does contain protein, rice does contain protein, but you want whole grain flour because that's the one that's good for you. Brown rice, nachni, juar, which is millet, all those kind of things have fantastic amounts of, well, not fantastic, but they have moderate amounts of protein in them. They're about 10% protein when you eat grains and whole grains. Sorry. So those are some of the things that we should be eating. And the last is nuts and seeds. So consuming nuts and seeds is also really, really healthy for you, and contains a lot of protein, as well as other nutrients that you should be consuming as well. So those are the fantastic protein foods that you can eat. You can look online, just Google vegan protein, and Google is your friend. There's great resources online, and they'll show you how much protein is in all the different foods. You can calculate how much you're getting based on the quantity you're eating, and looking at these resources online that tell you how much protein is in each of the foods, and you can get a rough idea of how much protein you're consuming per day. And then it becomes second nature. You don't have to always do it, but it's a great way to start measuring your protein intake and making sure that you're getting enough protein. Because I see a lot of Indian people that are kind of eating a diet which is low in protein. You want to maybe increase it more than what we have currently. So I knew you were going to ask me this question about soy and also about gluten. Let's focus more on soy. So the meat, dairy, and egg industry a long time ago realized that soy is going to be a competitor for their products because soy is so high in protein and other nutrients. For a long time, they started criticizing soy and making it difficult for people to consume soy. In Canada, they actually made laws where you can't call soy milk soy milk. You can't use the word milk on the box. And if you're selling the soy product, you can't use soy milk. And they also made laws that prohibited people from taking soy milk and adding things to it like calcium or vitamin B12 or other things like that to make a better product. So they made it difficult for the soy industry. The other thing they did is they started spreading a lot of nasty rumors about soy, saying that soy is bad for your thyroid. And the biggest lie that they make is that soy is full of estrogen. Soy does contain isoflavones. Isoflavones have a tiny, estrogen effect. It's an incredibly small estrogen effect. But they also have an estrogen blocking effect. So they also have anti-estrogen effects. So their interaction with estrogen receptors in the body is very complex. But when you do research, when you look at all the research on humans, it has no effect on children and their puberty. It has no effect on women, and it's not promoting cancer in women. It's not increasing cancer, gynecological cancers or breast cancers. In fact, it's decreasing it. And also, it's not having any effect on men in terms of sperm counts or testosterone levels or muscle mass. Whenever they've done studies, they have found that soy has no effect on any of these things. It's just a nasty rumor that's spread again and again and again over the internet to make people scared. And it's originally created by industry, but now it's circulating so much that people are actually afraid of soy, but that's in fact a healthy food. It is shown to reduce your cholesterol. It is shown to strengthen your bones and have less fractures for people who consume soy throughout their life. It is shown to reduce breast cancer and reduce prostate cancer. And it has this fantastic amount of protein as well. And when you have soy products that are fortified with B12 and calcium, it's a great way to get those other nutrients too. So soy is a fantastic thing, and it's definitely okay to consume it. You shouldn't worry that, do I have to consume fermented soy? No. Fermented soy or non-fermented soy, it's both fine for you. You don't have to worry about GMO soy any more than you have to worry about GMO rice or GMO wheat, tomatoes or GMO chickens, beef or eggs, because all of that is GMO. But the nice thing is that you can actually get a lot of organic soy products. So in fact, the organic soy is superior to all these other products that have pesticides and things in them. And it's very, very affordable. So it's a fantastic way to consume organic protein that's pesticide free. And it's good. There's no, the safety data is fantastic, and it's fine, So that's my thing about soy, and it's great to have. I hope that over time in India you'll have more soy milks and soy products available that are fortified with calcium and vitamin B12. We'll get to that a little bit in the next question. And when it comes to gluten, people are paranoid about eating wheat and wheat products, and then they start eating more animal products. The thing is that whole grains are good for you. Whole grains are good for you. And this whole thing about gluten, when they've done research on it, they found it to be mostly bogus, except for people who truly have something called celiac disease. For people who don't have celiac disease, it's fine to consume. It's actually fine to consume gluten. But other than gluten, there's other grains that are whole grains that are fantastic. There's, like I mentioned, millet and nashni and brown rice, eating the whole brown rice and all those kind of things. So whole grains consumed are fantastic for you. Don't worry about gluten, but just also don't over consume grains also, because most of us nowadays are not working in the field. We're not exercising all day. We're not walking all day. There's a lot of energy in carbohydrates. So we should eat a moderate amount according to the, how many calories you need. So if somebody's overweight, you probably should consume less. But if somebody's underweight, you may want to consume more. And if you're just right in the right body weight, then just consume the amount of grain foods that you're already consuming, and just look at how much you need according to your own body weight and body mass index.
Okay, Tushar. So, do vegans need any supplements?
Okay. Sorry, can you repeat that question, please?
Do vegans need any supplements?
So generally speaking, people do not need supplements if they're having a complete vegan diet, as I mentioned. So getting all of the different food groups, you should be getting pretty much everything. But there is one exception, and that is vitamin B12. Now, vitamin B12 comes from bacteria. It does not come from animal foods. It comes from certain types of bacteria that make B12. These bacteria are in the soil and they are in water. And they're actually, one of the interesting things that's maybe kind of gross for some people, but they're actually in the poop of humans and animals. So when people long time ago lived in the jungle, they used to eat things that might be just on the ground or drink water from any kind of pond or water source, even if it was a little bit dirty. And in fact, animals and humans were pooping all around too. So these kind of things would also get a lot into the soil and contaminate the food. And people used to be surrounded by a lot of B12. You'd get B12 from all these different sources. Now in modern life, we wash all of our food and it's all clean. We filter our water and then we purify it. And there's no bacteria in there, or hardly any bacteria in there. And so we're not going to get B12 from those sources anymore. So our B12 is not found in the plant food so much because we've washed it out in those ways. Animals may still get B12 if they're grazing or walking around in the fields and those kind of things. They get B12 because they're still eating from the ground or they're still drinking any kind of water. So they may get some B12. But a lot of the animals and a lot of the dairy, eggs, and milk that people are getting, and the meat that people are getting nowadays, are grown up in these big farms, in these big factory farms. And food is brought to them. They bring in grains and other foods to feed these animals. That food also now is deficient in B12 because these animals are not going around and drinking water and eating from the ground. So what they do is they actually add B12 supplementation into the food of these animals. And these animals are actually taking B12 supplements, and the milk, meat, and eggs is getting the same B12 supplement. So similarly, if people are eating meat and eggs, in most cases, they're just getting supplements. But people who are vegan or vegetarian should also add B12 to their diet. They should take a B12 supplement. So I tell people take a 1,000 microgram tablet once or twice a week. Or they could take that tablet and split it into 4 pieces and crush it and put it into the food of their family 4 or 5 times a week. So you're spreading out the B12 over a longer period, and then you absorb a little bit more because you're spreading it out. But we should always be supplementing our B12. Get your B12 checked every year for a couple of years. And if your B12 is okay, fine, then just keep eating the way you're eating and then check it every maybe 2 to 3 years, okay? But you should always check your B12. Vegetarians should do it. Vegans should especially do it. But the interesting thing is that even meat eaters, when I had meat eaters, when I was doing family practice, I had a lot of meat-eating people in my practice, and fantastic people, of course. I love all of my patients. But I found that many of them also had vitamin B12 deficiency. Not as much as vegetarians. Statistics shows that vegetarians and especially vegans can have more B12 problems, but meat eaters can too. So I give them the same advice. I tell everybody, even if you're eating meat, dairy, and eggs, you still got to test your B12 once a year for a couple of years, and then every 2 years, continue to test your B12 and make sure it's okay. A lot of people who are not vegetarian, they still need to supplement their B12, okay? You do not need injections. If you're low in B12, you just take a 1,000 microgram tablet once a day for about 30 days, and then you take it twice a week, measure your B12, and without injections, you can get your B12 back up to normal levels. So that's the one supplement that you really got to pay attention to, is vitamin B12. Now, the other thing that you want to pay attention to is things like iron, okay? Now, people can get enough iron, so you have to I tell people to Google vegan iron or vegetarian iron. And then you can find really good iron sources from plant-based foods. So things like lentils and certain type of green leafy vegetables and whole grains, they contain they contain iron. And then calcium as well. So things like sesame seeds and mustard greens, kale and broccoli, they contain iron, but they also contain a lot of calcium. And if you Google vegan source of calcium, you'll find that. But also things like fortified plant milks, like soy milk and whatnot, can be fortified with calcium, and that can be a great calcium source as well. You need at least 600 milligrams a day of calcium. Some people need more, but don't fall below that amount. The research shows that you should actually at least be above that amount. I mean, I guess it depends on your definition of vegetarian, because some people talk about lacto-vegetarian. That means they're vegetarian except, for drinking milk. And some people say lacto-ovo-vegetarian. So they're vegetarian except that they do consume milk and eggs. So, people can have flexible definitions about this. But it's definitely not a vegan food. We can certainly say that eggs, unfertilized, are not from a plant, right? They are indeed an animal-sourced food. So we can agree that they are an animal-sourced food and not a plant-sourced food. Okay, so that's one thing. The other thing is, from a nutritional standpoint, it acts like an animal food in your body. Milk and eggs have animal protein and animal fat and cholesterol. So high in saturated animal type fats, high in cholesterol, and the protein is animal type of protein. And they're causing similar problems in our body, essentially increasing heart disease, increasing certain types of cancer, increasing diabetes, obesity, and those kind of things too. So, they increase the percentage of these things. Doesn't mean that every single person who consumes these products will get that problem, but they increase the percentage of those problems, okay? So from that point of view, it's still an animal-based food and acts like an animal-based food in terms of our health. In terms of other aspects, they act like an animal food when it comes to the environment and it comes to animals as well. What happens is that animal foods do consume more resources to produce. You need more land, more water, and more of other resources as well to produce these animal foods. It causes more climate change, more deforestation, etc. And you have to convert plant food into an animal food. So there's a net loss of the plant food. It sort of takes like this much plant protein to feed a chicken to get this much protein back in like your milk or your egg or your meats. You're losing some efficiency there. So it takes more resources, has a higher environmental impact. And lastly, with respect to animals, what happens is that these chickens who are raised for eggs, what they do is they hatch all the chickens. And if the chicken is male, then they don't need that baby chicken to produce more eggs if it's from an egg thing. And so what they end up doing is they kill that baby chick. These chickens that are used for eggs are ultimately slaughtered, and they're kept in cages, they're kept in horrible ways. So in terms of the ethical perspective as well, certainly these animals are all killed. So eggs, as I was saying, the summary is that ultimately they're gonna kill all of those chickens, they're gonna kill the baby male chicks as well. So for people who are vegetarian because of an ethical thing, or if that's your concern, then certainly there is a huge ethical concern. It's not like all these chickens lead happy lives. Ultimately, it's a death row for all of them as well. Now, when it comes to milk, the interesting thing is it's the same in India. India has the largest beef export in the world currently. We have the largest beef for export industry in the world here. It's mostly buffalo, but also a lot of cow slaughter as well. And what happens over here in India is that you have to, or anywhere in the world, for milk, you have to make the cow pregnant every single year in order to get milk. So if you have a cow, you're going to make it pregnant every year, make her pregnant every year, and she's going to have a baby every year. Now, if the baby is a male calf, then this calf is useless. They're not useful on farms anymore. People don't use them. People use tractors. And pretty much they're killed off in most cases. Very few make it to a sanctuary, but there's not enough sanctuaries for all of them because every year the population is so high. And the female calves may be kept around to produce dairy later on, but once they get a little bit older and their milk production declines, they are also slaughtered or let to die or let go on the streets or something like that. In fact, there's too many female calves born as well, and so often they are killed. And this is a whole complex subject, but there's a lot of that. There's about 300 million cattle in India. Most of them are female. And after every 2 to 3 years, you can have about another 300 million births, because they're all becoming pregnant by the dairy industry. And then you're going to have an extra 300 million births every roughly 3 years. And pretty much for that number to be born, the equivalent number has got to die in some way, shape, or form, because you cannot sustain that population in the country, and you cannot indefinitely grow that population. And this is exclusively because of the dairy industry. So there's an ethical concern as well for milk. As I mentioned, there's the health concern and the environmental concern. It's all the same for eggs or milk as well. And therefore those are the, ethical and environmental reasons for choosing to go plant-based. But health is really the focus for, I think, the greatest number of people. So that's why this is the main topic here today. Okay. So what foods should vegans or people who are plant-based, what should they avoid? Now, the thing is that there is a lot of junk food that you can eat in India or Canada or anywhere else that is vegan. You can have Coca-Cola. You could have potato chips. You can have fried samosas. You can have these gantias and jalebis and all kinds of sweets and candies. There's a lot of foods that people should not eat, even if they're vegan. You could eat, like I said, there's things like Coca-Cola and chips of all kinds. There are fried foods, there are samosas, there are gantias, there's jalebis. So these are things that are highly processed foods. I also mentioned orange juice before. If you're having juice from orange, you are basically eliminating all the fiber and mostly consuming the sugar in the juice. So we should avoid that, okay? And rather eat whole oranges and apples rather than apple juice or orange juice. So avoid these fried foods, avoid all these sugary foods, avoid foods that are highly processed, avoid things that are white, so white sugar, salt, and refined grains, Maggi noodles, all that kind of stuff. Maybe once in a while you treat yourself to some of that kind of thing, but do not eat it on a regular basis, because in India, people eat way too much of that stuff. Instead of eating gantias, which are high in protein, or fried dals, eat things with chickpea flour or chickpeas and whatnot that are not fried and not full of fat. So those are the ways you want to consume foods. You want to focus on the whole food, low fat, plant-based. Remember, that's what you want to do. Whole food, low fat, plant-based, okay, or vegan, and avoid things that are highly processed, fatty, fried, sugary, refined grains, refined carbohydrates. Avoid that stuff. All these people talking about how carbohydrates or grains are bad for you, it's just the refined grains that are bad for you. The whole grains are over and over shown to be really healthy for you and have a slight impact to reduce cancer and heart disease as well. So, those are the things that you want to avoid.